There were a lot of different problems with me that were going on that I've been talking to doctors for 10 years. None of them could fix any of my problems. Problems I didn't realize I had that doctors didn't even tell me. A friend of mine, Kerry Kasem, came to me and said, "You have to meet this guy, Gary Brecka. He's incredible. He's a human biologist." And I didn't believe in any of this stuff. We finally ended up connecting, and he did my blood work.
On September 10th, the world of combat sports was shaken by a story that spread like wildfire. Dana White, the man who had built the UFC from a failing organization into a global empire, was suddenly at the center of a frightening rumor. Whispers claimed that he had collapsed during his morning routine, that he had been rushed to the ICU, and that his health had taken a severe turn for the worse. For someone who spent his career cultivating an image of control, power, and invincibility, this rumor struck deeper than anyone expected. Fans, fighters, and industry insiders were left reeling. Because the one thing nobody ever truly imagined was seeing Dana White vulnerable. But before we get into the events of that morning, you have to understand the story that led him here, the battles he fought outside of the octagon, and the weight of an empire that may have finally pushed him beyond his limits. Dana White's story doesn't begin with luxury, billion-dollar contracts or global fame. It starts in Manchester, Connecticut, on July 28, 1969. Raised mostly by his mother after his father left early in his life, his childhood was anything but stable. Moving around constantly, struggling to find order in chaos, young Dana quickly realized that life wasn't going to hand him anything. He hated feeling powerless, a feeling that defined much of his early years. School wasn't where he thrived. Instead, his passion lived in sports, particularly boxing. Even as a boy, Dana had a streak of obsession and toughness that set him apart. He was known as scrappy, never backing down from confrontation, and always pushing back against the idea that someone else could control his path. That hatred of weakness and the desperate need for control would fuel him throughout his life. College didn't work for him. He wasn't built for classrooms or traditional paths. He dropped out, determined to carve out something that was his own. Boxing wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. In Boston, he worked as a boxing instructor, scraping together a living through cardio classes and small-time training gigs. He was ambitious but broke, living with a low ceiling over his head and no clear way forward. Then came a turning point that would force his hand. After running into trouble with notorious figures connected to Whitey Bulger, Dana was told he owed money. Violence was promised if he didn't pay. Instead of caving in, Dana did what fighters do best. He fled the trap. Packing everything he owned into a single bag, he left Boston for Las Vegas, a decision that would change his life forever. Las Vegas became the testing ground for his ambition. At first, he survived by teaching boxer-size classes and managing fighters, hustling to make ends meet. But the city of bright lights, chaos, and opportunity was exactly the place where Dana could thrive. Managing fighters like Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell in the late 1990s, he found himself connected to a sport on the brink of collapse. Back then, the UFC was anything but the global powerhouse we know today. Critics dismissed it as barbaric human cockfighting. Sponsors refused to touch it. Politicians wanted it banned. Major networks ignored it. For most people, the UFC was a failed experiment, a dying promotion nobody wanted to be associated with. But Dana saw what others didn't. He saw potential. He saw the future of combat sports. Of course, vision alone wasn't enough. He needed backing. And it came in the form of his childhood friend, Lorenzo Fertitta, a casino executive with deep ties in Nevada and the resources to take risks. In 2001, Dana convinced Lorenzo and his brother Frank to buy the UFC for $2 million, a move that would go down as one of the greatest investments in sports history. Dana became president of the company, the face and the voice of the UFC. But the job wasn't glamorous. The company was bleeding money, losing tens of millions of dollars in the early years, and many believed it would collapse despite the new leadership. Dana, however, was relentless. He knocked on doors, pitched to networks, and fought for every deal. The breakthrough came in 2005 with The Ultimate Fighter, a reality TV show that introduced MMA to mainstream America. Dana became a star in his own right, not just a promoter, but a character who embodied the intensity of the sport. His brash, unapologetic attitude drew people in. You never knew what he was going to say, and that unpredictability kept fans hooked. The UFC exploded in popularity. By the mid-2000s, the organization had become a cultural juggernaut, and Dana White was its beating heart. Every big fight, every major pay-per-view, every turning point had his fingerprints all over it. Fighters respected him, feared him, sometimes despised him, but nobody could deny that he was the engine driving MMA forward. But success carries weight, and weight takes its toll. Dana White built the UFC with a vision of total dominance. He wanted it everywhere, on TV screens, in video games, in arenas across the world. He wasn't content with being successful. He wanted the UFC to become synonymous with combat sports itself, and he achieved it. The UFC expanded globally, drawing record crowds in London, Abu Dhabi, Brazil, Australia, and beyond. In 2016, it sold to WME IMG for $4 billion, one of the biggest sales in sports history. Dana remained president, pocketing millions, but more importantly, keeping his position as the public face of the UFC. To the outside world, it looked like triumph stacked on triumph. But the man at the center of it all was under pressure most people couldn't imagine. Dana's health had always been fragile, though he worked hard to hide it. Back in 2012, he revealed he suffered from Meniere's disease, a rare and debilitating condition that caused vertigo and dizziness so violent that he once described it as feeling like you aren't in control of your own body. For someone obsessed with power and control, it was devastating. He experimented with stem cell treatments, claiming some success, but the disease was only one part of his larger struggle. The years of stress, late nights, non-stop travel, and constant responsibility weighed on him heavily. Fans often noticed him appearing flushed, fatigued, or stressed during events. Rumors swirled about blood pressure issues and cardiovascular concerns. Dana always denied them, insisting he was healthier than ever. But those close to him knew the truth was more complicated. He clung to discipline as his shield. His mornings became sacred, filled with workouts, strict diets, and relentless routines. He prided himself on outworking men half his age, lifting, sweating, pushing himself through extreme cardio sessions before most people had even started their day. To outsiders, it looked like discipline and strength. To those paying attention, it was also desperation. An attempt to keep control over the one thing that was slipping away: his health. He projected strength because weakness was never an option, not for Dana White, not for the man who built the UFC into an empire, but fragility has a way of creeping in, no matter how strong the shield. On September 10th, something finally cracked. That morning started like countless others, with Dana training hard, driven by the same intensity that fueled his rise. But this time, it didn't end the same way. Rumors spread online almost instantly. Some said he collapsed mid-session. Others claimed it was a sudden medical emergency. Nobody knew for sure. But one thing was undeniable. By late morning, the MMA community was buzzing with reports that Dana White had been rushed to the ICU. The silence from official channels only made things worse. Normally, the UFC is quick to respond to speculation, whether to confirm, deny, or control the narrative. But this time, nothing came. No statements, no reassurances, no denials. The vacuum of information only fueled the panic. Fans began dissecting his recent appearances, noting his flushed face, his fatigue, the tension in his voice. Social media lit up with speculation. Fighters posted cryptic messages, wishing him well without mentioning details, which only convinced people that something serious had happened. For years, Dana White was untouchable. But suddenly, the illusion cracked. The man who built his reputation on control now faced a moment he could not control, and the fight world was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Dana White, the indestructible force behind the UFC, was human after all. As the rumors of Dana White's hospitalization spread, the fight world erupted into chaos. Forums and social media platforms became battlegrounds of speculation. Was this exhaustion catching up to him after years of punishing schedules, endless flights, and unrelenting stress? Or was it something more serious, something that had been looming over him for years but kept carefully hidden from the public eye? The lack of answers only made the situation worse. By evening, fans weren't just worried about Dana White the man, they were worried about the future of the UFC itself. For over 2 decades, Dana White wasn't simply the president of the UFC, he was its identity. Every major decision, every fight card, every pay-per-view had gone through him. He wasn't a background executive, he was the voice, the energy, and the shield of the company. Fighters often clashed with him, some even despised him. But even they admitted that without Dana, their careers wouldn't have been what they were. The thought of the UFC without Dana White at the helm felt unimaginable. The silence from the organization only magnified the unease. Journalists scrambled for answers, reaching out to managers, PR representatives, and fighters. All they got was either silence or vague statements. No comment became the phrase of the day. For a company built on constant spectacle and non-stop storytelling, the sudden refusal to provide clarity was unusual. It sparked conspiracy theories. Was his condition worse than anyone was letting on? Was the UFC intentionally buying time before releasing official news? Was the empire on the edge of a leadership vacuum? Meanwhile, fighters posted cryptic remarks. Some wrote messages like, "Stay strong," or "Prayers up," without mentioning names. But everyone knew who they were talking about. Fans latched onto every tweet, every Instagram post, dissecting emojis and tone for hidden meaning. The speculation turned into obsession. Entire podcasts were dedicated to unraveling the mystery. People replayed old interviews, watching for signs of fatigue in his voice, weakness in his posture, strain in his face. The narrative of invincibility that Dana White had built for decades was cracking, and the world was watching. Behind the speculation was a deeper truth, one that has haunted Dana for years. His empire demanded everything from him, and he gave it willingly. But the human body has limits. Dana himself admitted that he thrived on chaos, that he needed the grind, that he felt alive only when the stakes were highest. But the body isn't built to sustain that kind of pressure indefinitely. Fighters half his age burned out under the UFC's relentless schedule. Yet Dana never slowed down, never admitted weakness, never allowed the world to see him as anything less than unstoppable. It was as if he believed that the UFC itself was tied directly to his image, and that if he ever faltered, the empire would falter with him. That's why this moment hit harder than anyone expected. It wasn't just about one man's health scare. It was about the realization that no matter how powerful, no matter how successful, no matter how iron-willed, everyone is mortal. For years, Dana White presented himself as untouchable. But September 10th reminded the fight world that even the strongest empires rest on the shoulders of human beings who can break. as the days went on, no official confirmation arrived. Fans split into two camps. One group demanded transparency, arguing that, as the public face of a billion-dollar industry, Dana White owed them the truth. The other side insisted on privacy, reminding people that despite his fame, he was still a man with a family, a man whose struggles didn't have to be laid bare for the world. That tension between transparency and privacy only made the speculation worse. Fighters preparing for upcoming bouts felt uncertainty like never before. Would their fights still happen? Would negotiations stall? Would the company pivot under different leadership if Dana were truly incapacitated? For athletes whose livelihoods depended on the UFC's stability, the silence felt like a ticking time bomb. In gyms around the country, conversations weren't about training camps or strategies. They were about whether the man who built their careers was lying in a hospital bed, fighting his own battle. And that's where the story takes its sharpest turn. For once, Dana White wasn't fighting journalists, rival promoters, or politicians. He wasn't fighting critics who called the UFC barbaric. He wasn't fighting fighters over contracts. This time, his fight was internal. His opponent wasn't in the octagon. It was his own body, a battle that money, power, and influence couldn't guarantee he would win. The possibility of the UFC without Dana White suddenly felt real. Who could replace him? Could anyone truly embody the same mix of business ruthlessness, promotional genius, and raw authenticity that made him one of the most polarizing figures in sports? Names were tossed around by fans, but deep down, most knew the answer. The UFC without Dana wouldn't feel like the UFC. He wasn't just the president. He was the promoter, the hype man, the voice, and the shield. He was woven into the very identity of the sport. And that is what makes this story chilling. The empire he built is bigger than any one man, yet somehow it has always revolved around him. His hospitalization, whether temporary or something far more serious, proved that the future is uncertain. The illusion of invincibility has been shattered, and with it, the comfort that the UFC would always have the same edge, the same voice, the same fight. Dana White has always said that fighting is in his blood, that he was born for conflict, that he would rather burn out than fade away quietly. But September 10th was the day when the world saw the cost of that mindset. The grind that built an empire may now be the same force that brought its leader to the edge. And whether you admire him, despise him, or fall somewhere in between, one thing is undeniable. Dana White has always been a fighter. This time, his fight is against something none of us can ever truly control: time. And if you want to keep up with stories that peel back the curtain on the fight world, stories that show you the battles beyond the octagon, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.